Hey there Dev Squad, Virtus here and welcome back to my Unreal Engine 4 sequencer course. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at how you can set up fade tracks inside of your sequencer to make it look super smooth. If you take a look at the screen, you can see exactly what we're going to be creating. In addition to this, we're also going to be showing you how you can take your sequences that you've created and export it out as a movie ready to upload to YouTube or to share with your friends. Without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into Unreal Engine 4 and get started. Okay, so now we're inside of Unreal Engine, we're going to be introducing you to how to use fade tracks inside of Sequencer to add a smoother transition to the beginning and the end of your sequences, or even just when you are switching between different shots. Then what we're going to do is take a moment to show you how to render out your sequences into an AVI file, which you can use to upload to YouTube, show your friends, or even use in your portfolio. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive straight into it. So what we're going to do is find some empty space in our sequence, and then we're going to right click and we are going to add something called a fade track. This fade track is essentially going to allow us to fade to black and then fade back into, normality, so 0 on the alpha. So using one of these is incredibly straightforward. It's a timeline just like any other track. You have your timeline here and you can put keyframes along the way. Now what we're going to be doing is, at the end of our sequence that we've got here, what we're going to be doing is fading out to black. And also we're going to be doing a fade just before the camera changes as well to smoothen that transition from going from one camera to another. So what we're going to do is go to the bottom of our track here and we're going to create a keyframe. And notice under our fade here we have a value. 0 is going to be completely transparent. 1 on the other hand is going to be completely black. So what we're going to do is set this down to 0, and then from there we are going to go to the point where it's about to change the camera. And then a couple frames before, we're going to add a new keyframe at 0, and then just at the moment that it changes camera, we are going to set this to 1. And what this is going to do is essentially it's going to fade to black over the duration of those two keyframes. And then what I can do is a couple frames later, we can fade this back down to 0. And by having done this, what it's going to do is it's going to go through and it's going to fade back in. So make sure you set this keyframe to 0, just like that. And then if we go ahead and take a look at this, press play, you can see there's now a nice smooth transition from one camera cut to another. Now what we're also going to be doing as part of this sequence is at the very end here, we are going to be fading to black as it goes out of the sequence. So we're going to create the start of the fade, which is going to be around here, and we're going to add that keyframe. And then at the very end, we're going to add another keyframe and we're going to set this to 1. So essentially it's going to fade out as it goes out of this. Now what you could also do is at the beginning of our sequence, we could set this to 1 to make it fade into the sequence. So if we go from 1 and then create a keyframe and set this to 0, a couple of frames after that, what we now have is a really smooth track with some fading, and it's really going to make it look a lot more professional and a lot better on the eyes. Okay, so now that we have a really nice looking cinematic with our fade tracks in there, what we're going to be doing is showing you how you can actually render this out to turn it into a video that you can go and send to your friends. Now what you can do is just use this sequence as a cinematic if you wanted to, which I'm going to be showing you how to do. Or alternatively, you can render it out. Now, if you wanted to just have the cinematic play in the game, running off an event, that's really straightforward and very easy to do. I'm going to open up the level blueprint for now. And then what I'm going to do is select my level sequence in the viewport here. And then if we create a reference to this, what we can do is use a little blueprint node called Play Sequence Player. And then with this, the target is going to go into your sequence, the master sequence we created, and then from there you can have an event on there. For me, I'm just going to be using event begin play. And now if I go ahead and compile this, and then play the game in the selected viewport, you are going to notice it is going to play that cinematic straight away. And once it's done, it is just going to return you to normality and you can continue playing the game. So that is absolutely everything you need to create a cinematic. You now know how to implement that into your gameplay. But in terms of actually taking this sequence outside of Unreal Engine, let's go ahead and do just this. So if we go over to our sequencer user interface, in the toolbar here, we have the picture of a clapperboard that says render this movie to a video or image frame sequence. Go ahead and click this, and in here we have our render movie settings, and this is where all of the magic is going to happen. Now there is a lot of different settings in here, and I'm going to go over all of the important ones. So first things first, we have our image output format. Inside of here, the main two choices you're going to have is either an image sequence or a video sequence. An image sequence is essentially going to be where the engine is going to export out an image every single frame, and it is going to give you a big folder full of these images. And these are typically going to be in different formats for images, so JPEG, PNG, and so on and so forth, and a lot of video editors can use these. Or if you just want a straight video file, then what you can do is just use a video sequence instead, and this is just going to play like something you'd expect to see on YouTube. So go ahead and select video sequence. With this, you now have your audio output format. You've got two options: no audio, which is pretty self-explanatory, and then we also have our master audio submix. This master audio submix is essentially going to export out the audio from your sequence. Now this is experimental, and I definitely advise you go ahead and read the text here. Moving on from here, we have the frames per second. The frames per second is essentially going to determine how smooth your video is going to be, or how many frames there is going to be every single second. Now, if you have more frames, it is going to be smoother, just like a video game. If your game is playing at 60 FPS, it's going to be buttery smooth. If it's playing at 15 FPS, it is going to be a little bit choppy. Now, when it comes to the different frames per second, one thing you do want to bear in mind is the more frames you have per second, the larger the file is going to be. Now, the typical industry standard for renders and cutscenes is 60 FPS, so go ahead and set it to that. And then you've also got your resolution. The resolution is typically going to be 1920 by 1080. However, you do have other options here to choose from. Myself, I export all my stuff out in 4K, as I do have a 4K monitor and upload 4K content for my cinematics. You can also go to custom, and then with this you can set a custom width and height. The reason why you might want to do this is because if your video doesn't conform with normal aspect ratios, which are used here, 16:9, you can then go and put that in there. For now, 3840 by 2160 is perfectly fine for me. Moving on from there, we also have our compression. Do you want to use compression? Yes or no? The more compression you use, the smaller the file is going to be. Now, there is this slider here for the quality. I advise you leave that on 75 as it's a pretty chill number, but if you do want that smaller file size, then definitely go ahead and turn it down, but you want to make sure you're getting the sweet spot. So let's go ahead and set that to 75. Moving on from there, we have got our file name. World is essentially going to take the level name and then use that in the file name. It's pretty self-explanatory. Once you export out your first movie, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. Moving on from there, we also have our path for our directories. So this is going to determine exactly where the files for this movie is going to be rendered. You can see at the moment it's currently being rendered inside of the Unreal project in the saved folder and then video captures. If you wanted to, you could set this to your desktop if you wanted to. So let's go ahead and do that. Select folder, and then we're going to go from there. File name format, we're just using that world, and as you can see on this list we can reference all of these little names here to automatically generate different things. I'm going to leave it at default. And then one of the most important things that we have here is our game mode override. Now, if you have all of your game mode stuff that is going to conflict with this sequence, so if you have your heads up display on the screen and stuff like that, make sure this is all turned off, and the way you're going to do this is by setting your game mode override to something without all those UI elements and all the gameplay elements. With all of these settings here, we're not going to worry about those or the sequence settings either. Moving on, the only other settings inside of here that you want to worry about is use custom start frame. That is something that you can do if you want to, so if you don't want it to start from the 0 point, you can start it at a later point. You also have a custom end frame, so you can finish it early or you can finish it later. You just input a specific frame into here. By default, it is going to use the values that you have set up inside of your timeline. And then last but not least, you also have your warm up frame count. So essentially what this is before your sequence actually starts, it is going to add a couple of warm-up frames. Now, when you have post-processing, you are going to have something called eye adaptation, and that's just going to adapt the lighting, and you can also do a few other bits with that as well. So what this is going to do is just counter that, let all of that adaptation take place before it actually goes into the main cinematic. So if you wanted to add 100 frames beforehand to accommodate for that, you can. And you can also use the delay before the warm-up as well. It's entirely up to you. But generally, the only settings that I really worry about when I'm recording this stuff is simply just the video sequence, audio, yes or no, the frame rate, the resolution, and then the output directory as well. If all of that is good, go ahead and hit capture movie. What this is going to do is start recording this sequence, and you're going to see this pop up in a separate window. So what I'm going to do is come out of that. I'm going to have all of these settings here. So what I'm going to do is set my directory back to the one that we had before, which was used for the Unreal project. So we're going to go to Unreal projects, sequencer demo, saved, and then video captures, and we're going to select that folder. With that done and all of these settings good to go, we are going to press capture movie. Do you want to save content? Yes or no? I'm just going to make sure I press yes so I don't lose anything. And what you'll see in the top left hand corner, we are going to have this little window that it is going to be rendering this content out of. Now bear in mind, this is not 4K over here, it's very small, but it is going to be exporting it out in 4K. And you're also going to notice it's going to be in slow motion, and that is simply because it is running in real time. What I mean by that is my processor in the graphics card is not going to be able to render out 60 FPS in 4K. So instead it's going to slow it down and make sure it gets that full 60 FPS. Once that capture is finished, what it's going to do is export out a file. And if I go ahead and open this, you can see we've got our sequence with our fades, with our particle effects, and we are good to go. So as you can see here, we've created something that looks really, really professional, and you should be on the way to creating some really smooth cinematics. Anyway guys, that is absolutely everything for this video. I hope you have enjoyed it. Once again, thanks for watching, stay awesome, keep creating. Virtus, signing out.